Okay, well, there's a problem though. I don't know if you caught that. I kind of lay a little trap for you here, right? The problem is,
Do you think that it's okay for Donald Trump to take political prisoners on behalf of Israel
what
for their
political
speech?
prisoner?
For their speech, for all the immigrants being their visa being revoked on behalf of their from their speech. Right now, the State Department going through with no masks on, or with masks on, sorry, and unmarked vehicles, going in and tearing through these peaceful communities to take people into vans to ship them off to Louisiana on the basis of their speech. Because in my opinion, that's a really big thing to worry about.
Okay, so I will answer this question, right? First off, there's two different ways to look at this. There's the legality of it and the morality of it. I'll actually give you what you want. One of the things I've criticized Trump for heavily, I'm for defunding all of these universities. But if you're going to selectively do it, I think that what's occurring right now, if we're honest, is it's being done on the basis of protecting one country from their feelings being hurt, which is Israel. And I think it's despicable. And I think that it is something that we need to have a bright line for, to have an exact framework for when we're allowed to revoke visas, when we're allowed to revoke sort of student visas and things of that nature. However, I do think that as the United States, we have the right to people that aren't citizens in this country and are guests of this country, whether it be illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, green card holders, etc. We do have a right to say, if these people are antithetical to the United States, we could kick them out. That's different than sending them to prison. The due process isn't the same when it comes to having the right to continue to be a guest in the country. But having said that, I think that it is clearly being selectively applied on the basis of Israel, and it's something that I've criticized Trump over and over. The first person that got deported, Khalil, I forget his last name. You know who I'm talking about, though? Do you know?
Yeah, there's hundreds of students now.
So this was the first person, and there are allegations, and I'll ask you a couple questions about this. But in the future, there are allegations, for example, that he lied on his visa application and things like that. But it is clear that the initial targeting was because he was a visible person during these pro-Palestine protests. You would agree with that, right? I think we're both in agreement that that's why he was targeted. And I don't think that that rises to the level of why we should be revoking someone's visa. But can I
Okay,
ask you a couple questions about that? Oh, you go ahead. You can.
about this, or do you want to go? Because I was going to let you answer another question about lockdowns. Because
Well, no, no, no.
I
I
have one
want. We
question
could go
about
back.
that.
We could go back to lockdowns, but while we're on this topic right now, so the question I'll ask you is: do you think the United States has the right to deport people that maybe didn't commit a crime, but we think are antithetical to the United States? For example, let's take this: if they're burning an American flag and saying "Death to America." Free speech in the United States, me and you have the right to say that as citizens, but should we have the right to deport someone who's not a U.S. citizen that says that?
Um, this is an issue for me with like Congress, for example, because Congress is essentially in a cult-like mentality right now. So on the tariffs, on other powers Congress should have, they could pass laws or at least make their stance known on these issues, but they can't disagree with anything like Trump does. So it's really hard for me because, if you want to use legal justification, if the Secretary of State can say like, oh, I want to revoke a visa, then okay. The normal standard would be you give like a 30-day notice, like your visa has been revoked, and leave the country by this date. There should never be an instance where there's masks on and they're going to a university with an unmarked van, and just like rampaging through communities. Like there might be an issue eventually if they go to a more conservative area, maybe, and they want to use their Second Amendment right. How do they know they're federal agents taking this poor girl into a van? So when it comes to this issue right now, I think the checks and balances of our government in general, our constitution, but also just our government, it just is not functioning because you can't really question the leader. And the same thing with tariffs. They can rip across our communities and whatever. And Republicans, they're getting minor pushback with like Rand Paul and a couple others. But I think there's an issue right now with the Republican Party where it's valueless. It really gets just follow dear king. And that's really my biggest
I
concern.
disagree with that. I disagree with that framing, but regardless, let's take that framing out of it and the legality out of it and just say, forget about the text of the Constitution or the INA or all these other things that regulate who we can deport and when. Do you think morally that the United States justifiably should be allowed to kick out guests of this country if they were saying something as simple as "Death to America" and burning the American flag? Forget that
Oh,
it's
no,
some
no.
man in a mask that does it. We need to start from a framework of, do people that are guests in this country, not citizens, have the same free speech rights as me and you? Right? I
Oh
think
yeah,
that's a
and
worthwhile
I've said
question to
to
ask.
I've said to many people I've spoken with in real life too, where they say, well, China and Russia don't let you come in and criticize their country. And I'm like, bro, if you want to bring the laws of China and Russia and North Korea to America, go live in those countries. You can easily move from America if you want someone to be restricted and we want to use violence against tourists and whoever for for just speaking, like going through phones, like the fact that DHS is going through phones and everything, and they announced today they're going through social media feeds. They put up a post on social media which they quickly deleted today. I don't know if you saw it, but they said we have to prevent illegal people, money, and then it said ideas. We have to prevent illegal ideas from crossing over borders. And it's like, yeah, they're really just policing. And I want everyone to realize too, talking about China and bringing those policies here, they're using facial recognition technology and going through social media. If they're using facial recognition, just like the Patriot Act issues, and this is like Patriot Act on steroids that the Trump regime is currently doing, if they scan for faces of immigrants, if they scan for faces of anyone in this country, they're scanning all of our faces. They're scanning all of our faces and making a big database with all of our faces, because they have to collect who's citizen, who's non-citizen. And that's like a huge Big Brother scenario that's happening right now. And I know Musk and a couple of the other Curtis Yarvin acolytes or whatever the hell those weird ass tech bros are, those brain dead nut draggers, like they're following under this system where they think we need to be under mass surveillance. So I think we got to watch out for like Peter Thiel and Musk and this big cabal of these tech billionaires for sure.
I don't see how that was like. I'm not saying what you said there is true or not. I'm not like, it didn't seem to be an answer to the question at all. Like the question's pretty simple. We're just talking about like sort of philosophical principles of how a country should operate. Are you saying that that yes, citizens of this country have the exact same free speech rights as guests of this country? And so, because we both agree, as a United States citizen, we both have the First Amendment where we could say death to America. We should be able to say that, and we shouldn't be locked up for that. That's not a crime, correct? You agree with that portion. So should we, as a country, be allowed to kick out people that we bring in on a visa that say death to America? I hate America. They're going to rallies saying, I hope America dies. Or I'm pro-ISIS. I think that ISIS is good. Should we have the right to kick those people out? Or, much like an American citizen, do they have the right to say that with no punishment?
Yeah, it's interesting there too, because if you have like someone who's an immigrant or a tourist and they're literally chanting "Death to America" marching through the streets, then you can have a sympathetic attitude where it's like, hey, why are we like, why is this person just like, it sounds like they're threatening people. So you could have a process for that possibly, but I don't think anything should be done unilaterally from one government official making a decision.
Well, okay, so I just am trying to get to a baseline. So you would say there could rise a level where speech that would be considered legal speech,
just like any speech, yeah.
Okay, but that would be enough to deport. So there is a lower tier of free speech available for people that aren't citizens that we could say, look, you've lost your privilege of being here.
I would say no. From a principles perspective, I would say no.
You would say that same principle of free speech applies equally to the citizen as the non-citizen.
Yeah, it would need to.
That's insane. That's asinine.
I don't want the government. I don't want the government regulating any speech.
That's completely okay. Having said that, would you feel the same
differently
way
at least?
Okay, so then you were against pro-life protesters that were locked up for protesting abortion clinics.
If there were any that are actually protesting, but usually they assault people or like directly harass
many
them.
Many of them don't.
Okay, I need to find a case of this.
Okay, you want me to find a case where someone was arrested that didn't physically assault? Okay.
Well, at least like didn't like spit in someone's face or like get in their face or
Well, get in face? What does that mean?
Like spit in their face or harass them. I think harassment counts too, and stalking if that happened.
Okay, but what if it wasn't? If it was just if there was someone that was locked up that just because I believe you could disagree with me if you want. We could look this up. I believe the law says that you can't be verbally dissuading people from abortions or criticizing abortions within certain footage areas of abortion clinics. You would be against that law.
I'm okay with that law for the protection of the other person's right to not be walking into the doctor and have some crazy screaming at them.
But you acknowledge that that's an imposition on their free speech.
I think it's actually infringing on someone else's personal rights.
Let's assume that that's true, but you would also be an infringement on their free speech.
I don't think that someone should be in front of any doctor's office yelling at you about your health decisions.
That
would be harassment. That would be targeted harassment.
You just previously said you always support free speech. You're pro free speech. Now you're saying
I support the same rights for citizens and non-citizens. I don't mean I support literally to cause the violence, of course. Anything that would not be covered under our legal definition of free speech in our court cases, I would not say.
So in this particular. So in this particular example, you think that curbing their free speech is a net benefit because the harm that they inflict by other people having the right not to hear that while they're going in to get an abortion outweighs their free speech right.
I think having I think there's a reasonable amount of preventing harassment that is definitely justified there to protect the other person's rights.
Well, I think that shows that you're not someone who would be anywhere near sort of a free speech absolutist. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm
But
not going to.
you know what the laws are though.
Please, just let me finish. I'm not being very wordy here, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not calling you names or anything, but I heavily think that the reason that it seems that you've sort of done almost a 180 on free speech in this short period of time is because it aligns politically with your message. You're probably someone who's heavily pro-choice. And so you don't have a problem with locking up people or having laws of not allowing people to protest in abortion clinics. But if someone said, well, we're going to have a law that says that you can't support a terrorist organization like Hamas, you would have a big problem with that. You would say that's outrageous. That's a violation of their free speech.
No, because that would not be content neutral is a big part of this. So like, for example, the abortion thing, like that matters for pro-life or pro-choice. So it's content neutral. Content neutral laws on that basis to protect someone's right to walk into a doctor's office without being harassed is totally different from saying we're going to target a mosque or a church or whatever. Totally different.
What do you mean target a mosque? That's not the no
If
one's
targeting a
making
specific religion. Like
No one's-
I think.
But no one's doing that. Like no one's made that accusation other than me at one point talking about the Patriot Act targeting Islam.
Do you think a Nazi should be able to stand outside of a mosque screaming like Muslims are not human with a swastika?
I think if they're not if they're on public property, yes.
Okay, so if they're on the sidewalk in front of a mosque, a neo-Nazi
Yes.
should be able to like. Okay,
Yes.
I mean,
I think particularly if they're a citizen, that's free speech. You remember the Westboro Baptist Church people that were disgusting that would hold the I can't use the word because but God hates homophobic slur for.
Well, you can still do that, but
Right.
it's a reasonable like limit outside. So, like for example, if you're walking into the church, you don't need to see that you're subhuman every single day. It'd be like a law. It'd be content neutral, so it'd be any religious place of worship. It could be a mosque or a church or a synagogue, whatever. But I'd be in favor of a law that prevent let people go to church or a doctor's office without being harassed. Yeah.
Well, again, like, where do you draw the line in this? Like, then, for example, what if it's a climate change protest and they're on a public sidewalk and not leaving people? People are trying to get into. Oh, hell, let's use an example that's happening right now. What if it's a Tesla dealership and people are screaming and not leaving people quickly enter a Tesla delership to purchase a vehicle or to get maintenance on their vehicle? Would you be in favor of saying that should be outlawed? They're on the public sidewalk.
Isn't that should it be outlawed if you're preventing movement of people to get into a business? Yeah, that should be illegal.
Preventing movement, that's a different level, but just sitting there screaming.
I'd be okay
Should
with
that be illegal?
I'd be okay with some type of limit from illegal grounds for harassment targeting businesses. But then you're already committing civil disobedience if you go to over a certain amount. Or if you're doing vandalism, or if you're preventing movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're like the Tesla dealership's right there, and like you can't be on the sidewalk right in front of it, you need to be off to the side. I'm not talking about that you can create these limits where it's like you cannot be seen in public or anywhere near the place. I'm just saying that someone should not be able to be like directly harassed anywhere within physical reach.
But you seem to be conflating two different things. Like, I guess then it hinges on what we consider harassment. Because interestingly, you seem to be making the point that I'm making. Because if you remember, I'm actually defending like people like Khalil, because look, if this particular case ends up that he was doing more things, like for example, if he was committing a crime by trespassing, or if he was committing a crime by physically assaulting people, blocking people, etc., that's different than just his free speech. But I'm operating off the assumption that forget about his visa issues, that the reason he was targeted was for the idea that he was free speech and in the eyes of this administration was supporting Hamas. I don't like that. I think that is clearly, I think that Israel has too much control over our country when it comes to these sorts of policies, and it's one of the down points of the Trump administration right now. And I think that it is something that we need specific bright line in the courts to weigh in on. Where is it that we're saying that legal, people that are here legally, illegal is different, but people that are here legally that we're going to deport, I don't think that it rises to the level of their free speech entitlements the same as us as American citizens, but there needs to be a bright line of like, well, what's the type of stuff that they would say that we would say that's too much, we could kick you out. I think maybe death to America would rise to that level. I don't think saying, hey, I think Israel's going too far, there's genocide in Palestine, I don't think that rises to that level at all. And it doesn't matter if I agree or disagree with that statement. I just don't think having a geopolitical perspective. Now, if they're saying, and I support Hamas and I'm giving financial money to Hamas and Hamas is designated a terrorist organization, it gets wishier. But I don't like the way that it's playing out right now. The point that I'm trying to make to you, though, is we have to have sort of a philosophical understanding of what free speech means against us and when we're allowed to curb that. I think when you say, well, there are levels, like if you're physically stopping someone from leaving an area, yeah, that's a different crime altogether. That's a different set of problems. But when you say, I don't think you should be allowed there harassing them, I'm assuming that you're not talking about physically grabbing them or stopping them from entering. You're talking about them being right in front of Tesla on a sidewalk screaming, you suck, you're killing the world, Elon's a Nazi, you're a Nazi for buying a Tesla. Should they have the right to do that if they're allowing people to walk through them? Because it seems that what you're suggesting is you don't have the right to do that outside an abortion clinic. So are you also saying that for other areas where people would be shouting vile things at you on public property? And it seemed that you were like, well, not if they're spitting on them, not if they're blocking them from entrance. We agree those are totally different issues, just as the speech issue.
So
that's the question I have.
So there was I'm trying to see let me see. I'm trying to find the actual court cases for this too, because I think that is somewhat of a guidance of what we can do. So what's considered reasonable for this would be like 8 to 15 feet. So like that's what I mean when I say like they can still be present and still protest, but it's not enough to like create physical altercations or enough to like literally be screamed in the ear. And you could shut them off from your vision as well. So like the example of like the Nazi standing out of a mosque, or pro-lifer standing out of a Planned Parenthood or whatever. So I think the 18 to 15 feet, it seems like that's usually legally held up, which is something I'd consider to be like, pretty reasonable as well. But then like 35 feet, Massachusetts tried doing this. 35 foot, the Supreme Court struck down 9-0 unanimously in 2014, saying 35 feet violated speech to a large extent. So I'd be okay with like 8, like that, like I just said, the 8 to 15 feet seems reasonable for like the Tesla example as well.
Okay, well, there's a problem though. I don't know if you caught that. I kind of lay a little trap for you here, right? The problem is, if the U.S. government, if the Trump administration embraces that same mentality and says every single student that we locked up screamed and harassed people within 10 to 15 feet of the entrance of college buildings, then haven't they just committed a crime?
No, okay, so what I'm talking about right now is like, for example, if they would have said like, if they would have accused someone of a crime in this situation and not made it explicitly about speech, then they could. If there was rules about like, for example, like if they were outside of a synagogue or a mosque, whatever the protest was, and they were doing this and they violated that, then you can argue they're being civilly disobedient in a way that targets another culture or race. But now they're connecting the anti-Israel to anti-Semitism and saying they hate America as well. So like that's the big issue with like their framing of it and the unilateral powers. Because like, by the way, like this would never stand up in a court if like on the basis of freedom of speech. I doubt it's going to stand up anywhere with like the current process they're going through. But if what you just said was like, if what you just said was a law, if it was a law that they couldn't be within 8 to 15 feet or whatever, and they were like literally standing in front of the door and shouting slurs at someone and harassing someone, then that's a little bit different. But it's also just a general protest to a foreign country that we fund and protesting a war that they're doing. So it's different than
now,
like protesting the person's identity in front of you.
Let's be honest. Many of these protests weren't just people saying, hey, we're just criticizing Israel. There were certainly things that were being said that could reasonably be construed as anti-Semitic. Well, and there's a lot of people that seem to be reasonable that are of Jewish orientation that said that they not only felt harassed, but felt intimidated. So you get into murky waters when you're like, well, I think that this sort of language is okay, but once it enters the area of like 7 to 15 feet, then I don't think it's okay. And just saying, well, if it was a crime, that's one thing. Well, that's not going to really help you, because I think you're actually wrong when you're looking at the legality of this, because my understanding of reading some of these policies is deportation is not considered a punishment. And sort of the way that like the INA is written said is we could basically deport people for any reason, that they're here at our privilege. And so like some of the reasons are like pretty vague. And so if someone
could
make that may be fine. You may not like it, but if you are embracing this idea, and if your idea that you're embracing here would be embraced by sort of the Democratic Party as whole, theoretically, which is, you can shout harassing stuff, whatever, that makes people feel that they're being harassed, as long as it's outside of 15 feet. But once it enters inside of 15 feet, well, I think that's different. I think that there should be a law against that.
Well,
real quick, I promise.
You're going over so many points here. You're kind of demonizing me in this process.
And we could prove that these people were within 15 feet of like an entrance to a college building, then it would seem, based on your rationale and the fact that they don't have to commit a crime to be deported, that would be reason enough to say, well, that's harassment and we should be allowed to deport people for harassment.
Okay, if they were going up to Jewish students and saying, we hate Israel, you're at fault, that's a totally different thing. That's targeted harassment, which is what I'm talking about with the mosques and what I'm talking about with, with the Planned Parenthoods. And like with the entire situation we're having here as well, you mentioned Jewish students. There are millions. I mean, there's thousands. Sorry, not millions, but there's thousands of Jewish students who are speaking out against Israel, and their voices are completely suppressed on these campuses. And the students do not, they're not listened to at all. There's Jewish voices that are very against what's happening right now, as far as revoking visas and what Israel is doing right now, and not being fond of the Israel government. So I think it's not good to act like all Jewish students are.
I'm not acting like that at all. I think that honestly, it's quite stark to me. I've personally been on campuses, particularly in the debate community, where I have been harassed for being white. No one gives a shit about that. Like, you ain't gonna see the Trump administration deporting people for that. You can continue to have curriculum to talk about the problems of whiteness. That ain't gonna lead to anybody being deported. So I think that there's a problem with this. I think that it is clear that Trump has a strong relationship with the nation of Israel, and that there were people legitimately that felt threatened by a lot of these protests that were Jewish, but there's an awful lot of more people that want to make excuses for any valid criticisms of Israel as being anti-Semitic. And they will stretch the law and stretch their influence they have in order to make sure that it's highly punishable. I think even more troubling than a lot of this stuff is a lot of the like sort of hate speech laws and the way it's written that you see being suggested by Republicans all around this country that say certain things that you would say would be considered anti-Semitic that I think are legitimate protests. I thought it was ridiculous when it was it Ilhan Omar that said about AIPAC, it's all about the Benjamins? And everyone was like, well, that's anti-Semitism. I disagree. You're talking about one of the successful lobbyist groups in our country who's clearly using their money and influence to influence the United States, and you're saying that it's racist and bigoted to mention that it's about money to them? Of course it is. It's not because they're Jewish. The fact that Jewish people might have that stereotype that, oh, if someone criticizes me about money, it's because I'm Jewish. No, maybe it's because I think you're doing bad things with money. It has nothing to do with your ethnicity. So I'm in agreement with you that I actually have big problems with the way this has been done. Now, this conversation's separate from illegals. We should be able to kick any illegal out at any point whatsoever because they're not here legally. I don't give a shit if the reason we give for that is they're criticizing Israel or not. But it's a different question when it comes to people that aren't citizens with legal status. I would like to see some sort of bright line. I'm probably closer to saying, yes, I'm okay with deporting certain people for certain language. But I would like to see exactly what the government is saying. This is the line that if you go over this language, we could deport you. But I think you're directionally correct that the reason that these people are being targeted is because they're criticizing Israel. And I have a massive problem with that. And I've said so, not just on my show, but I don't know if you know, like this lawyer I debate all the time, Pisco. We had a big conversation about this like 2 weeks ago, where I talked all about this. You can find it at my channel. So your pushback that I'm not going to talk about this, because I'm only pointing out that a lot of people like Pisco that are talking about this authoritarianism like you were perfectly fine with what I think is objectively far more egregious authoritarianism that we've seen in past administrations.